How the Vikings impacted English. The English language is fascinating. Do you know what else is super cool? Vikings. Originating in the northern Europe and Scandinavia, the Vikings were a group of nomadic people. Fun fact, Vikings and the English language are actually related. One might ask, how are they related? Well, the Vikings impacted the English language in many ways. However, the first thing that comes to mind when you think about them is probably not their effect on the English language. You probably think about their ruthless invasions, and maybe some long hair, long beards, and big horns. Anyway, back to the facts. How did the Vikings affect the English language, one might ask? Well, to know that, you must first understand the Viking invasions. The first recorded Viking attack in Britain occurred in 793. The Vikings arrived by ship and were described as violent, to say the least. After this, the Vikings continued to sack Britain. Although this was devastating, Britain was pretty used to this kind of thing. They were no strangers to warfare. However, there was one aspect that set Viking attacks apart from all the rest. This factor was the locations that the Vikings chose to sack, often included holy sites and sacred monasteries. The Vikings murdered monks, stole treasure after treasure, and seemed to have no respect at all for British religion, which was Christianity, by the way. The Vikings' lack of respect for Christianity especially shocked the British people because they had not yet met any previous foe who did not honor their relics and monks in any way. There was very little planning involved in the Viking attacks. With help from their brilliantly designed boats and some luck from useful winds, the Vikings were able to successfully attack as often as they wanted. These attacks occurred throughout England by the Danish Vikings and Scotland and Ireland by Norwegian Vikings. One may be surprised to learn that Vikings did not only loot Britain for treasures and capture people to sell as slaves. In fact, Vikings also desired and obtained land for farming. Younger sons in a family would not inherit their family's land, so they may go to Britain and attempt to colonize. Political exiles, mercenary warriors, and traders would also do the same. In the west of Norway, most of the land was not fertile enough to sustain a family. So, people from there might come to Britain to colonize and get farmland. This was probably an attractive option for these people because they had already heard all about Britain from people they knew who had already raided the area. The Vikings that colonized islands in Scotland could continue to raid surrounding places whenever they wanted, while they were also farming, trading, or do whatever they wanted with their land that they had obtained. The Danish Vikings that colonized England took a different approach. In 850, a Viking army camped on the Isle of Thanet for winter, while the English paid them protection money. This proved to be a successful tactic for Vikings, and they continued to camp and extort protection money all over England. No matter how it was done, the Vikings conquered and eventually settled everywhere in Britain. For Viking farmers to sell their crops and for Viking traders to trade, Vikings and the English had to communicate. Since Old English was extremely complex and difficult for adults to learn to speak, the Vikings developed a simplified English that did not include gender and verb conjugation. Soon, the simplified English spread throughout the Viking community. As the Vikings continued to assimilate and eventually intermarry, the new English spread even more rapidly. Eventually, the aspects of Old English that were not included in Simplified English were completely gone. It was previously stated that the Vikings conquered and eventually settled everywhere in Britain. This is not completely true. The kingdom of Wessex was able to escape the fate of its surrounding kingdoms, thanks to King Alfred the Great, who defended his kingdom from the Vikings, sieged the Danish fortress, forced Guthrum to promise to leave Wessex alone. Guthrum was the Danish king. And in 866 they signed a treaty, the Danelaw Treaty, that reaffirmed this promise. It said that Guthrum could have the north and east of England, and Alfred could have the south and west. This is how Vikings and English really began to live together. Old English and Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, were actually two extremely similar languages with very similar vocabularies. This fact is most likely the reason that the Scandinavian farmers and traders that moved to England were able to quickly and easily assimilate with the English that were living there. Soon, both Old English and Old Norse began adopting aspects of the other language as they became even closer and closer. Because the Scandinavians that moved to England were mostly farmers and traders, Old Norse seeped into all aspects of Old English. Similar to what occurred in England, and at the same time, Danish Vikings attacked northern France, established the Dukedom of Normandy, and assimilated into French culture. As a result, they left their Germanic culture behind and replaced it with French influences. In 1066, Duke William II of Normandy invaded in England in the Norman invasion, and conquered England in the Battle of Hastings. The Norman French rulers in England spoke Norman French. Since most of the Normans at this time were high class, Old English mostly incorporated Norman French words into the higher class aspects of culture like military, government, religion, law, leisure, art, and cuisine. During the 8th and 9th centuries, Vikings from Scandinavia attacked, conquered, and settled in England, while Danish Vikings were attacking northern France and establishing there the Dukedom of Normandy, who eventually invaded and conquered England. Resulting from these events, over time, of course, Old Norse and Norman French contributed to significant changes in the English language, including words and grammar. And with that, here are my sources. Ta-da!